When it comes to power in Satisfactory, there are many do's and don'ts, but that's a different video for another day. Today we're focusing on one of my favourite sources of power, turbo fuel, whilst exploring the best and the worst recipes you should either use or massively avoid. So let's begin the video. So what exactly is turbo fuel? Well, I like to describe it as regular fuel, but on steroids. It is very efficient, it burns slowly, and it produces a really good amount of power. Starting with fuel, we can see at 100% clock speeds, we use 12 fluid per minute, or 1 fluid every 5 seconds, which might not sound too bad. And the output in regards of megawatts is 150 megawatts per fuel consumed. So in total, it's 750 metric cubes, I believe that is, or megajoules. So it's not too bad. But when we compare that to turbo fuel, we can see that the results change drastically. So at 100% clock speed, rather than burning 1 every 5 seconds, it's 1 every 13.3 seconds, which is massively better, almost 3 times better. Hence, the fluid per minute consumed is 4.5. And obviously, you want to try and consume the less fluid, or the least amount of fluid per minute. So that's very good. And of course, the output in regards to megawatts remains the same, because you're still at 100% clock speed. But because the burn time is so long, it means you're getting more power per fuel, which of course is very important. Okay, so that sounds good and all, but what does that actually mean in regards of efficiency? Well, this is my recommended turbo fuel recipe, which I'll get onto it in a bit more detail in just a couple of minutes when I talk about the other alternate and basic recipes for turbo fuel. But what I want to pay most attention to is this. With this recipe, I can produce 111,111 megawatts of power, which I'm very, very happy with. So if I wanted to produce this amount of power without using turbo fuel and just using regular fuel, how much crude oil is this going to cost me? Because again, with this recipe, it's just under 4,000 crude oil, again, for almost 112,000 megawatts of power. So if we scroll underneath here, luckily I've done that calculation. So for 111,111 megawatts, you need 8,889 fuel per minute. And to make that, you need 13,334 heavy oil residue. Of course, you do get some poly resin from this, so I mean, it's not all bad. That's a good amount of poly resin. But to make this heavy oil residue and the poly resin, you need 9,999.999 recurring crude oil. So let's just say 10,000 to make my life a little bit simpler. 10,000 compared to less than 4,000. This is a really big difference. Of course, straight away you can see that this will require a bit more work, but not necessarily, because look, heavy oil residue, and heavy oil residue. So basically all you're making is heavy oil residue, and you need a bit of extra sulfur. So this might look really complicated, but in reality, it's honestly not. Also, if you do like tutorials like this, I'll be making a lot more on this channel, so subscribe if you guys are interested in Satisfactory. Also, we are getting so much closer now to 1,000 subscribers, which is incredible, and it will be awesome to try and hit that before 1.0 comes out. So again, subscribe if you guys are interested. Furthermore, this is just using the basic fuel recipe. There are a couple other fuel recipes in the game, like you can use the blender, for example, so that might save you on a little bit of oil, but still, the point stands, you're consuming a lot more crude oil than if you were to just use a turbo fuel recipe, or this turbo fuel recipe. So, there's a lot of differences. Yes, turbo fuel requires more resources and potentially more work, but I think it's 100% worth it. The only question is, what recipe should you choose? Well, if only someone had calculated all the turbo fuel recipes and compared them side by side to see which one is more efficient. So I've calculated all turbo fuel recipes and compared them side by side to see which one is more efficient. And here is what I found. Starting off with the regular turbo fuel recipe, you see a lot of people using this, and after doing my calculations, you can see why. If you remember correctly before, we were using about, or a bit under 4,000 crude oil per minute. This is a tad bit over 2,250, which means you're barely using any crude oil, but you're still making 5,000 turbo fuel per minute. This is absolutely incredible. The only downside, as we'll discuss in just a second, is you are consuming 4,000 sulfur and 4,000 coal, which, yes, there's a decent amount of coal in the game, just get a few drones, trains, trucks, and you'll be grand. But sulfur? That's a lot more sparse, unfortunately. But when you do look at this recipe, yes, we are using a different recipe for fuel. Again, this is our blender recipe, I believe this is. I do recommend using this if you ever make fuel. Yes, you are going to need water. Yes, it's quite a lot of water extractors most likely, but I do recommend using, I think it's about 500 or 50 water extractors. Either way, yeah, that's there. Heavy oil residue, again, is not really too much because we're not really using much fuel. The main issue would be here with the compacted coal. But this is a very simple turbo fuel recipe to construct, and if, for whatever reason, you've got 4,000 sulfur lying around, then heck, feel free to use this recipe if you like. But it's not the only recipe. Additionally, we have got the turbo heavy fuel. And again, you might see, yeah, this requires a little bit more crude oil, I mean, over double the crude oil, and it requires more sulfur, and it requires more coal. I mean, if I'm being completely honest, I think this is a pretty crap recipe. The only thing it sort of rules out is having to convert everything into fuel, which saves on generators, or not generators, blenders, and water extractors. But you're using double the amount of crude oil, and more coal, and more sulfur. So personally, I would not recommend turbo heavy fuel, and I would give this a massive miss. Unless maybe if you're watching this video, you have used this recipe, comment down below why. I would generally love to know. Maybe there's a reason I am missing out on. But yeah, for me personally, this is a big avoid. And then of course we get down onto this recipe. I should probably explain what all these colors mean. The black means it's a raw resource like oil, water, or sulfur. And the purple means that it's a non-raw resource that you're still having to make. For example, we're making heavy oil, we're making petroleum coke, and we're making fuel. But you can't just mine petroleum coke out the ground, you have to make it with some other things. And then the red, which is basically just polymer resin, is the free or extra resources you can get from these projects. And I'll compare everything in just a wee second. But as we can see, again, like I was explaining earlier, this does look very confusing. Got 1, 2, 3, 4 different things, then going into turbo fuel in a massive blender. It's annoying. But it's actually not annoying at all. And that's because, again, look here. Heavy oil residue. And over here, heavy oil residue. And over here again, heavy oil residue. All you're doing is just making the 5010 heavy oil residue, then splitting it 3 different ways. It's really not as difficult as it seems. Plus, you also do get a decent amount of polymer resin in here as well. I said 2,500 there. I don't think it is. Oh, no, it is. No, I was correct. Who would have thought my working out was right? Wow, what a surprise. Yeah, so is this efficient? Should you use this recipe? Well, let's see. Because down here, again, I've got the basic, I've got the heavy fuel, I think this is, and blended fuel. And in green, you can see the best, the cheapest resources consumed, if I can speak English. And the black, you just see the resources that weren't quite as good. So, if you use the basic, you save a lot on crude oil and petroleum coke. That's because we're not using petroleum coke. But if you rule that out, the only thing you are saving on is crude oil. If we go to the heavy fuel recipe, you are only saving on resources that you're not using, if that makes sense. So everything that you do use, you use more than the other 2 recipes, but you do get more polymer resin. That's because you're using a stupid amount of crude oil, so obviously you're going to get more polymer resin. And finally, with the recipe that I like to use, you are saving on sulfur and coal, and obviously hence compacted coal. The main reason I like to use this is again because you save on sulfur, and I like to try and use a good amount of coal if I can. But this is what it is. If you are making 5,000 turbo fuel, this is what each of the recipes is going to cost you. So as my final conclusion, what recipe should you use? Well, again, it's completely up to you. I don't think it should be left up to a random guy on the internet to tell you what to do, you know? You should be a free thinker. Use whatever recipe you want, even if it's the recipe I don't recommend using. Go ahead and use it if you so wish, it's completely up to you. Additionally, it depends what you're trying to save on. If you're trying to save on sulfur, then use the recipe I recommend. If you don't really care much about sulfur and you're trying to save on crude oil, then use the basic recipe. Again, it all depends on what you want and what best suits your need. Also, if you are watching this video after 1.0 has come out on September 10th, then bear in mind some of the alt recipes might have changed. We don't yet know all the recipes that are changing, so odds are it might be one of these turbo fuel recipes, or it might just even be the regular turbo fuel recipe. We don't yet know. So again, take that with a pinch of salt. This video was made before September 10 and was made before pre-1.0. However, I will make a follow-up video if I so need to, which I'm completely fine with doing, obviously. Before we end off the video, I would like to ask a question. Would you guys like to see me design a turbo fuel factory? I am currently working on a brand new Satisfactory series that aired a couple of weeks ago, but it's going to take me a while to get to turbo fuel. So would you like me to make a quick mock design on a creative world to show you the best designs on exterior, interior designs, and best recipes? Well, a bit of a further depth in the recipes on a separate video? Again, let me know in the comments, and if so, I'll probably do that after 1.0 comes out, just in case they change something and then I have to redesign everything. But either way, I hope that you guys found this video helpful. It's quite a short video today, but I hope that, again, I was able to help you guys out a little bit. Have an amazing rest of your day, and remember, Godspeed!